What's going on, you guys? Welcome back to the SFS channel. My name's Gavin, and today I've got my wide receiver rankings for the fantasy playoffs here in 2020 as we enter into week 14. I've got my top 24 guys at the position, and as always, if you guys haven't already, make sure to go down and subscribe to the channel and hit that bell so you guys are notified whenever I come out with a new video. We are closing in on the 1,000 subscriber mark here on the channel, and once we get there, I'm going to be giving away 10 free draft guides for the 2021 season, just out of my appreciation for you guys' support. So thank you so much. Keep it up. You guys are amazing. Let's not waste any more time. Let's hit the intro and get into today's rankings. Before I get into today's video, I want to start things off by saying if you guys have 2 or more of these players on this list, you guys are sitting very well here heading into the playoffs. And with that being said, my number 24 ranked wide receiver for the rest of the 2020 season here as we head into playoff football for fantasy this year is Amari Cooper, the Dallas Cowboys' #1 wideout. And as of the time of this recording, he has not played his game against the Baltimore Ravens on Tuesday Night Football, which I am expecting to be a fairly rough game for that Dallas team, and especially that Cowboys offense against the Ravens defense. In particular, I think Marlon Humphrey will be guarding Amari Cooper throughout that game, and I think he will be fairly quiet in a very tough man-to-man matchup. Obviously, being my lowest ranked guy here on the list, he's got some downsides and some concerns and risks attached to him, but Amari Cooper, I would say, is a boom or bust play week to week. A guy with a lower floor because that Dallas offense can lay an egg on any given week, but he also has a very high ceiling due to the talent that he has. He's got a bit of a tougher schedule here coming up. He's at Cincinnati, who has William Jackson, who is a very underrated man-to-man corner and one of the better guys in the league this season. Then he's got the 49ers, who have been a solid front and I think can give that Cowboys line fits and cause some struggles for that passing game. And then he has Philadelphia in the Week 16 championship game. So Cooper, I like his value sometimes, but he's a bit inconsistent. I still think he is a wide receiver 2 here, though, for the remainder of this season. My number 23 ranked wide receiver is Chase Claypool, the rookie wideout for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I would say just behind Justin Jefferson, Claypool has been the second most impressive rookie at the position this year, and I would say maybe CeeDee Lamb can be tossed into that conversation, but in terms of fantasy, I think Claypool has some very nice upside and value here going forward this year. This is being recorded post the Monday Night Football game, where he had probably his most quiet game as a starter with only 2 grabs for 38 yards, but nonetheless, Claypool has been a touchdown hog this year and has racked in a lot of those receptions and been a big-time end zone player. So Chase Claypool, I think, is a bit of a touchdown-dependent guy, but we've seen him get in there a lot this season. So going forward, I think it is reasonable to expect him to find the end zone more and have a very strong finish to the season. Obviously, though, he is not the most consistent player in the world. He has a decent floor, but not a super high one, so he lands a little bit lower on this list. Cooper Kupp comes in at my wide receiver 22, and Kupp being so low on this list isn't even so much of a thing that I'm not high on Cooper Kupp. There is just so many great wide receiver options out there that I just couldn't put any of these guys lower than him on the list right now. And Cooper Kupp has been a very nice PPR play this season. He's a guy who is trending up right now and has put together a couple nice performances in a row here, and a guy I think can finish this season off pretty strong in that Rams offense. I really like his floor. His ceiling isn't quite what it was last season, but I think going forward, Cooper Kupp can be a very good lineup piece and a dependable play for your playoff lineups. So Cooper Kupp, go out and start him, especially in PPR. I think this is a guy here, even at the wide receiver 22 spot, is a very dependable player. Coming in at my wide receiver 21 for the rest of this year, I've got Diontae Johnson, another one of the Pittsburgh wideouts, and Juju Smith-Schuster is the odd man out on this list. I prefer Claypool and Johnson the rest of this season over him, but Diontae Johnson this season has been exceptional and one of Big Ben's, if not, he actually has been Big Ben's favorite target this season. Coming into Monday Night Football, he led all Steelers wideouts and offensive players by 10 targets, and then he racked in 8 balls for 71 yards and a touchdown in that game against Washington. So Diontae Johnson, clearly an elite option at the wide receiver 2 position in lineups. I think that there's just so many great guys on this list and other options that he's a little bit lower here. I mean, he's been highly productive. He's got a safe floor, and when he's able to stay healthy and on the field and stay through those games, he is able to put up really, really nice numbers. I mean, this guy in the 8th or 9th round in drafts was a steal and a very valuable lineup piece. So Diontae Johnson, I'm super high on him the rest of the year, and I think that if there wasn't so many other great options, he would be much higher on this list. At wide receiver 20, I've got Robbie Anderson of the Carolina Panthers, and this is a guy who was actually a wide receiver 1 for the majority of this season and has been very exceptional and a high-level producer when Teddy Bridgewater is on the field and at quarterback for that team. And right now, Teddy B's healthy again. Coming off that bye week, I think Anderson is going to be very productive. His first game back in the lineup with Teddy, we saw Robbie have a very good performance against the Vikings, and he scored a touchdown in that game with a nice yardage total. So Robbie Anderson, a super high ceiling play and a very safe floor play with Bridgewater at quarterback. Those two have been a great combo all year long and deserve some more respect. I think Anderson will continue to put up impressive wide receiver 2 level numbers, and if he's able to find the end zone a few times as well the rest of the season, I could even see him finishing as a wide receiver 1. At wide receiver 19, I've got Brandin Cooks, the Houston Texans wide receiver, and obviously if Will Fuller was still in the lineup, Cooks probably wouldn't be on this list, and a Fuller would probably be even higher up here than Cooks is. But for right now, Brandin Cooks has been elevated into that number 1 spot on that team, and he's a guy who I think Watson can have a very productive relationship with on the field. We've seen Cooks throughout his career be a high-level deep threat and a guy who is a burner after the catch. So Brandin Cooks, I love his upside the rest of the year. A bit of an adjustment game last week in a tough matchup against the Colts when he still didn't do too poorly. So I think he's got a very nice floor going forward, and I think his ceiling is very high as well. This week against the Bears, who have been getting eaten up by passing offenses lately, I think he has a really nice opportunity to have another great game, and I think Brandin Cooks will be a nice mid-level wide receiver too. Tyler Lockett comes in at my wide receiver 18 for the rest of this fantasy season, and he is a guy who we have seen throughout his career be highly dependable with Russell Wilson, but this year he's been a bit more of a boom-bust play with the emergence of DK Metcalf. Lockett has a very high ceiling, but a lower floor this year. He's had under 9 points in 5 of his 6 last games, and he has also put up games of 32.5 and 45.5 points in half PPR scoring. So clearly Tyler Lockett has a pretty low floor. He's got a bit of a shaky floor in some games the rest of this season, but he could also go off at any moment and put up a huge game for your lineups. So he still warrants a starting spot on teams. I think he is very good as a wide receiver 2 in lineups, and I think this guy could be a game changer in terms of how he produces in the fantasy playoffs. So he's either going to win you your week or lose it for you, but I still think he is worth rolling the dice on. I would put Lockett in my lineups and bet that he can produce with Russell Wilson as his quarterback. At wide receiver 17, I've got Robert Woods, the other wideout in that Los Angeles Rams offense, and what puts Robert Woods ahead of Cooper Kupp for me is I think he has a bit more of a safe floor in that 12 personnel offense, and is a guy who gets those rushing attempts on those jet sweeps and end arounds. I think that helps his floor significantly, and I think he is actually a very solid route runner himself. We saw Woods haul in 10 grabs for 85 yards last week against the Cardinals, and the schedule going forward is pretty good as well. He's got the Jets, Seattle, and Arizona going forward here, and I think the Rams have some very good opportunities there to put up some very nice fantasy outings. So Robert Woods, as always, a dependable floor play for me, and a guy who I think posts a nice ceiling on occasion as well. I would look for Seattle to be one of those bigger games going forward. My wide receiver 16 for the rest of this season is Justin Jefferson, the Minnesota Vikings rookie wideout, and this is a guy who I think is very much in the mix for Offensive Rookie of the Year. Justin Jefferson has been sensational this season and a high-level fantasy play as well. We usually don't see this level of production from rookie wide receivers, but Jefferson has been the exception this year and a guy who has produced at a high level almost every week this season. Jefferson, he has a high upside the rest of the year, but I think in some tougher matchups, he has a bit of a shaky floor going forward. Some key matchups I would keep an eye on here are Week 14 against the Buccaneers, in which I think Dalvin Cook will have some struggles running the football, so I think that play-action game might be a little bit limited, and they will be a little bit more dependable offensively, and same goes for the championship game in Week 16 against the New Orleans Saints. So the passing game might take a bit of a hit. Jefferson won't be streaking wide open down the field quite as much, but this still is an elite talent and a guy that deserves to be in lineups. I think that regardless of the tough matchups, unless you have another great option, you keep him in your lineups. Julio Jones is my wide receiver 15 for the rest of this year, and Julio continues to slip down the list a little bit because that hamstring has been holding him back lately, and he's been banged up here throughout the season, and I think it is showing on his play and production on the field right now. Julio obviously is still one of the more talented guys in the league, but I think his teammate Calvin Ridley deserves to be higher on this list because I think he has a bit of a higher ceiling and a higher floor as well right now, while Jones is dealing with that ailment. So Julio's also got some tougher matchups, and Matt Ryan has not been on par lately. Only 3 passing touchdowns in his last 4 games. With that being said, I think there is valid reasoning to be concerned about Julio going forward in his production in fantasy, but I still think the talent and the opportunity and the need to pass the football in that offense will ultimately prevail and keep him fantasy relevant. Adam Thielen comes in at my wide receiver 14 for the rest of this year here, and Thielen simply gets the nod over Jefferson in terms of Vikings wideouts on this list, just because we are seeing him be targeted at a slightly higher clip than Jefferson is right now. Obviously, I think Jefferson is the bigger play guy and the guy who is more explosive in that offense. But Adam Thielen is a bit more of a safe play. We're going to see him get some more looks here in those tougher matchups, and I think that those receptions will be pretty critical here and give him a safer floor. So Adam Thielen still has the tough matchups that I mentioned with Jefferson, but he is a great route runner and has been a monster in the red zone with Kirk Cousins this year. Those guys have been on the same page for quite a few years now, and I think that Thielen going forward is still a safe and very dependable lineup play. Coming in at my wide receiver 13 spot for the rest of the season is Calvin Ridley of the Atlanta Falcons, obviously Julio Jones' teammate, and Ridley gets the bump over Jones right now, obviously because he is healthy, and we are seeing Matt Ryan go to him more, and he is being more productive with those targets. 5 grabs, 108 yards against the Saints last week, and he is a guy who I think is fairly matchup proof at this point in the year. He is an elite route runner, a very good deep threat, and a guy who we've seen find the end zone a fair amount this season. So Calvin Ridley, I really like his upside. I think he can have some monster weeks here potentially, and I think if he doesn't produce those numbers, he is still a guy who has a dependable floor and will put up very safe lineup production. Now we're getting into some guys that I see here as that elite group of wide receiver ones here in the fantasy football playoffs for 2020. And my guy on the back end of that list to round things out is Michael Thomas of the New Orleans Saints. Thomas is finally getting back to being himself. We've seen him in 2 of his last 3 games go for over 100 yards and have 9 catches in each of those performances. And going forward, I still like Michael Thomas' schedule. He's got Philadelphia with Darius Slay, who has been getting torched the last 2 weeks against DK Metcalf and Devontae Adams. And then he's got Kansas City, which should be a high-scoring game, in Minnesota, who is young in the secondary. So Michael Thomas, especially in PPR formats, I think is going to get peppered with a high number of targets again and be a very productive fantasy player. I think his floor is above anything the most valuable part of his game, and he is a very safe option in lineups. We haven't seen MT find the end zone yet this season, and if he does, I think that pushes his ceiling up as well. So with Drew Brees optimistically returning this week, I think that is another thing that bodes very well for MT's value. At wide receiver 11 for the fantasy playoffs, I've got Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and for a team that was struggling offensively for the better part of a month, I think that Week 13 bye was huge, and I think they will be much improved on that offensive side of the ball here coming into Week 14. I also love the Tampa Bay Bucs schedule here down the stretch all the way through Week 17. So Mike Evans, a guy who's been a monster in the red zone this season with the 11 touchdown grabs, I think can put up some very nice production here and win some weeks. I think he'll shock some teams and even cause some upsets in fantasy championship games. At wide receiver 10, I've got Allen Robinson of the Chicago Bears. And in terms of fantasy wide receivers in PPR formats, it does not get more dependable than Robinson. We've seen him for the better part of this entire season and last be the only dependable option on a week-to-week basis in that Chicago offense. And for a guy that has a universal safe floor, he also has a very great ceiling coming into this postseason in matchups against Houston, Minnesota, Jacksonville, and Green Bay in Week 17 if your league happens to go that long, in a game which he had his best fantasy outing of the season earlier on this year. So Allen Robinson, I love the ceiling and the floor. This guy is a deadly player in lineups this season and will not let you down here down the stretch. Coming in at my wide receiver 9 for the rest of this season is Chris Godwin, the other half of that elite wide receiver tandem in Tampa Bay. And I think, as I've stated many times this season, Chris Godwin is the mold for the perfect player Tom Brady wants to throw the football to, and is one of the most skilled guys in the slot who he's had in his career underneath to catch and get yards after the grab. Godwin has been by far the most consistent player in that Tampa Bay offense in terms of the wide receiver core, and has been a guy with a very nice ceiling last year with Jameis Winston, and I think he can certainly get the job done again this year with Tom Brady. As I mentioned earlier on in this video, I think Tampa Bay also has the best closing schedule for skilled players in fantasy. Obviously with Detroit, Minnesota, and the Falcons twice here, I think there is great opportunity to put up some massive games, especially if Godwin is able to find the end zone here down the stretch. I think he will be a league-winning player and a guy who has some massive production here in these last 4 weeks. Coming in at my wide receiver 8 is Terry McLaurin of the Washington football team, and he is definitely coming off his quietest game of the season here, but I am not too worried about McLaurin's production in that offense and the value he posts here going forward. McLaurin was held to 2 catches for 14 yards against the Steelers, but that was a very weird game. It was a defensive battle, and Logan Thomas actually dominated that game at tight end for that Washington football team. So he was Alex Smith's go-to guy here, but don't get yourself fooled. Don't be cute. Terry McLaurin is still the best guy in that offense, and especially with Antonio Gibson dealing with a toe injury and being forced out of that game early, I think they depend on McLaurin here more down the stretch. And as they look to creep into that championship spot in the NFC East, I think McLaurin will be the key to that offense. So Scary Terry, he's going to be a great producer here down the stretch. He's basically been immune to quarterback play and matchups so far this season, with the exception of Monday night's game against the Steelers. But going forward, like I said, I think he gets back on track and puts up those numbers we're used to seeing. Stefon Diggs comes in at my wide receiver spot here for the rest of this fantasy season, just a few spots lower than what I had him ranked at previously when I did my last video of this style. And Diggs has simply been electric this year with Josh Allen at quarterback. He's had a couple of down games lately, but is still a highly dependable option in lineups here going forward. I think Stefon Diggs and Josh Allen have been too good on those deep balls. They've been too good underneath as well, which is an aspect of the game I didn't expect them to thrive at this season. So Diggs, I think, will continue to finish this year off strong. He's got a middle-of-the-pack schedule. It's not too easy. It's not too hard. I think he will continue to thrive, like I said, and be a great producer for lineups. DeAndre Hopkins comes in at my wide receiver 6 here for the rest of this season, and he has fallen off a bit as well since my last wide receiver rankings video, but it is no fault of his own. His quarterback, Kyler Murray, is facing an AC joint sprain injury right now that is holding his production value back a bit as well, and that matchup and schedule coming up here for Hopkins and that Cardinals offense is not too favorable either. He's got the Giants that just held Seattle to 12 points last week. He's got Philadelphia, San Francisco, and the Rams for teams that finished their seasons off in Week 17. The tough matchups and the injured quarterback are what's holding Hopkins' value back here, and I think his ceiling takes a step backwards here as we finish the season off, but he is still a dependable guy who is going to see many targets on a weekly basis and a guy who has a safe floor going forward. A.J. Brown is my wide receiver 5 for the rest of this fantasy season, and this is a guy who has been an elite level producer all year when he's been on the field for that team. And coming up, I love Brown's schedule here down the stretch with Jacksonville in Week 14, Detroit, Green Bay, and Houston to finish things off this year. And for a guy who has shown he does not need very many opportunities to get the job done, I think Brown has a very high ceiling and a very safe floor here in these next 4 games. So A.J. Brown, I think, is going to put up very nice numbers. I expect that Tennessee run attack to be on point here the rest of the season, which will set up great play action passes, and that favors A.J. Brown significantly. So Brown, expect a strong finish. He is going to go out there and win league championships. A.J. Brown's former teammate at Ole Miss, DK Metcalf, comes in just 1 spot ahead of him here at wide receiver 4 for the rest of the season. And with Russell Wilson as his quarterback here, leading him down the stretch, even though they've had some underwhelming performances as of late, I think this is still a top 3 quarterback and wide receiver combo in the league. So Metcalf, I love his ceiling every week. Like A.J. Brown, he doesn't need too many opportunities to get the job done and put up a very high ceiling. So Metcalf, he's been great all year. He's been the wide receiver 1 at points this season, and a guy who is great on the deep ball and very dominant at the point of attack. Expect Metcalf to get back on track here and dominate down the stretch, especially in games like the Jets here coming up. I think he has a very nice ceiling, but be cautious of him in your championship games in a tougher matchup against the Rams. Coming in at my wide receiver 3 spot for the rest of the season is Tyreek Hill of the Kansas City Chiefs. And simply put, Tyreek Hill has the best quarterback in the league, throwing him touchdown passes every week, and he is also a very complete deep threat. This guy is not a one-trick pony that just runs past people. He can run the route tree to a T and is a very impressive wide receiver player. What keeps Tyreek Hill out of my top 2 for me is the matchups he's got here the next 2 weeks. He's got Miami, which has been a very underrated defense this year and has forced a takeaway in a lot of games here this season. And he's got the Saints as well, who have been playing lights-out defense as of late. But in Week 16, he's got Atlanta, so obviously he's going to go crazy in that game. But until then, I think his ceiling is held in check just a little bit by these matchups. but he is still a high-level producer because of his talent and the player throwing him the football. At wide receiver 2, I've got Keenan Allen of the Los Angeles Chargers, and Keenan Allen has been very, very impressive and a top fantasy option since Justin Herbert took over that quarterback spot for that Chargers team. And Allen gets the nod over Tyreek Hill for me because his schedule, in contrast to Tyreek Hill, is Atlanta here in Week 14, Las Vegas in Week 15, and Denver in the fantasy championships. Those are all very advantageous matchups and teams that Allen can exploit with his talent and Justin Herbert's arm. So he's a PPR monster going forward. He sees a lot of targets every single week, and Justin Herbert, being one of the more impressive rookie QBs, is definitely an elite distributor of the football. So Allen, I love his ceiling and his floor going into the championships here. I think he is going to be a dependable lineup lock-in week in and week out. If you guys have Keenan Allen on your team, you should be feeling very comfortable because you know exactly what this guy is going to give you each week. He is a extremely safe and dependable option the rest of this season. My wide receiver 1 for this fantasy season has not changed once this year. It has been Davante Adams from start to finish, and I will continue to put him as my wide receiver 1 until the season is over because of the elite touchdown production, the elite yardage totals, and the all-out dominance he has shown on the football field in 2020. Davante Adams and Aaron Rodgers have been the best quarterback to wide receiver combination in the league this year, and those guys have been absolutely on fire all season long. And not to mention, Adams' closing schedule is great here. He's got Tennessee, Detroit, and Carolina to finish off this season, and there's not a single guy on either of those teams that can guard Adams here down the stretch. Davante is going to go crazy. He's going to keep putting up his numbers, and I would not be surprised if he has more touchdowns than there is games played here down the stretch for him. So Adams, if your league's finish in Week 17 has Chicago, who he absolutely ate up 2 weeks ago, this guy is unstoppable. He's unguardable right now, and he is the best wide receiver in fantasy football the rest of this season. Those are my top 24 wide receivers for the rest of the 2020 fantasy season. If you guys enjoyed today's video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and turn that bell on so you guys are notified whenever I come out with a new video or go live for a fantasy Q&A. So let's continue the grind towards 1,000 subs here on the channel together, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.